So just up ahead of me is a hill fort in southern Britain here on a grey day, and one that I've never been to before. Now you might be wondering what this has to do with how we failed to map Britain's coast. Let me explain. So in there somewhere, we'll have a look in a minute, is Walbury Hill Fort. Now it was probably in use at some point between 500 and 100 BC. Not exactly sure what purpose it served. It was in the heartland of the Balgai tribe here in southern Britain. Now the Romans described this time as one full of barbarians and sacrifice and ritual and general violence. But here is the absolute fascination for me. You see, 200 years or so before the failed invasion of the Romans in 54 BC, these islands here were mapped by someone over 2,000 miles away in not too bad a detail. Our ramparts here are something else, quite an underrated hill fort I think. There's much more around the front side where there's open access land, but you can't get to it frustratingly. With regards to the Iron Age people and what they knew about their island and how it was mapped, well, my guess is they didn't know a great deal other than trade routes, where the next attack was coming from the neighbouring tribes and that sort of thing. But one man over 2,000 miles away was to draw a map, perhaps never replicated again for another 1,000 years. Welcome to the story of how we failed to map Britain's coastline. Okay, before we crack on down the coast and on with the rest of this video, just want a quick word from this week's sponsor, which is Himaway. Now you'll note we don't do many sponsors on this channel at the moment, but I'm really keen to do this one because I absolutely love this. So you know when we do a video and you might be thinking to yourself, God Paul, you walk a heck of a long way. If I insert some clips over the top of this, you'll kind of see why it appears that we've often got this in the background, this Himaway bike helping us get from A to B, and there's so much good stuff about this bike. Now when the bike first arrives, it does so in this huge box. That's by and large because it's almost put together for you. You just need to add the bits and pieces, some wheels, the lights, that sort of thing. It's really simple, really easy to do. I can do it with a bit of help from Rebecca. We end up with this beautiful, wonderful bike. Now, I'm not getting any younger, and for me, riding a normal bike is more and more difficult as I go, especially carrying all the gear. So I considered an electric bike, and here we are. Now, if you are considering that option too, I would highly recommend you click on the links in the description below. First of all, it claims a 6 to 7 hour battery life and up to 80 miles. Well, if I'm honest, I think I've probably done a little bit more on that. You've got 1 to 5 power options, and you can still cycle and still use your own energy, but you can also use it as a boost or just full tilt electric bike. Basics for me are you've got Shimano gearing, you've got hydraulic brakes, you've got lights which are fitted to the electronics, you've got the rack that goes on the back, which is really useful for sort of tying your bags to. I think for me probably the favourite part of this bike is not least the fact that it's electric, but also the fact that it's got these wonderfully fat tyres, and they make the ride so smooth, whether you're on concrete road, an old trackway, gravel, you name it, the ride is as smooth as you can imagine. If you ever consider an electric bike, I would genuinely choose Himaway and use our link in the description below, because that would help us quite a lot. On with the video. Eratosthenes was a bit of a genius. So you know you get those old myths from the late medieval about how they believed the world to be flat. Well, it turns out this guy had this covered 2,000 years ago. He lived in Alexandria, north coast of what is now Egypt, and he once read that as far south as Syene, a notable outpost, a phenomena occurred. Now this was about 800 kilometres south of where he lived in Alexandria. Now on June the 21st, it was said that at this outpost the sun would stand so high that no shadows were cast, and a well was completely lit to the bottom. Now Eratosthenes experimented, and he noted that at the same moment of day, the stick in Alexandria cast a shadow. He did some maths with the distance between Alexandria and Syene and the angle of the shadow cast, and behold, he declared the earth was not flat, it was indeed a sphere. Not only that, but he also calculated the circumference to be 40,000 kilometres. He was right, give or take just 75 kilometres. So our Eratosthenes just so happened to be the chief librarian of the Great Library in Alexandria. Now around 220 BC he drew a map that in my opinion was as good as any map drawn for the next 1,200 years. and yet he never travelled to Britain. Now this map that Eratosthenes drew, well, it gave us all the clues that we would really need. You see, this library of his, this library was a playground, and he drew this map based on all of the explorers, the great explorers that had gone before him. That really was the foundation for everything he knew about the geography of the land and the known world. Now, in our case, the single most important voyage was that of the voyage of Pytheas. Little is known about this man, about his motivation to explore and travel, and what craft he would have used. Furthermore, none of his writing survives today, but his work does through others. Now, Pytheas set sail from what is now southern France, and he sailed out of the Med and north. For this would be a monumental journey that would not only help us map Britain, but also give us absolute nuggets of information about life in the Iron Age here. He made the journey around what was France, now up into the Channel, the English Channel, and we think he landed somewhere mid-south coast, and he began to make lots of notes about the people, the sciences, the culture, everything he possibly could. Now, not a lot survives today, it's sort of through others that we know about him. However, there was one really notable thing that perhaps sticks with us to this day. You see, he referred to the land as Britannicae, or broadly translated into Britanni, Britannia, and that was referring to the painted people. So we possibly have a name that stuck forevermore: Britannicae, Britannae, Britanniae, maybe. Pytheas made much observations of the land, and he claimed to have walked much of it, noting how thickly populated it was. He noted that within 6 days sailing you would reach the island of Ichthus, where there is plentiful tin. Now, we don't know if this is St Michael's Mount, the Isle of Wight, or many others, but Diodorus, through the work of Pytheas, gives us much of an insight into the tin working. He notes the following: they are fond of interaction with strangers. They work the earth carefully which surrounds the tin. They grind it down and they smelt it and they purify it. They beat it into knuckle-like shapes, and get this bit, they carry it off to an island called Ichthus, where it is stored before trade with Gaul. This is great because this tells us so much about how the Iron Age saw their coastline and how they used it to protect their resources, using natural features to do so. And maybe, just maybe, that tells us so much more about how they saw some of these hills, and they converted them into hill forts, not necessarily occupied, but certainly in the same way here, to protect their resources before they were going to trade with them. Anyway, back to Pytheas. He headed north between Wales and Ireland, the west, and proceeded onwards. He measured the tides here and noted that they rose 80 cubits, much greater than anywhere in the Med. Now, a cubit is the distance between the inner elbow and the tip of your middle finger. He continued to take the latitudinal readings. We know little of them, but we do have a map from Eratosthenes. Pytheas continued north, noting the Orkneyness. And then, whilst we leave Pytheas, we continue with our struggle to map Britain at this stage. Pytheas did give us one last mystery. He referred to a piece of land as Fuels. Now, this landmass he suggested was 6 days north of Britain. Maybe this is the Shetland Isles, the Faroe Isles, perhaps Iceland, or even Norway. The barbarians showed us the places where the sun rests, and in these places the nights were very short, and in some places just 2 hours long. I love what we have with Pytheas in his writing, even though nothing survives, and of course it's passed on to us by other historians sort of a lot closer to that time period, even though a lot of them didn't believe what he had to say. See, for example, the cubits he measured of the tide and how it was such a range in tide. Well, that was a completely alien concept to them. Why would they believe him on that and many other things? But everything we know he said seems to be pretty true. So maybe the other things he said about the tribes of Britain, the Britain people, or maybe they weren't quite as barbaric as the Romans would have us led to believe. Perhaps they were, like he said, keen to trade and fairly hospitable people. Let's move on 300 years or so. We have the descriptive works of Pomponius Mela, the first known Roman geographer. He described 5 bands of the world, and whilst many areas were accurate, we do seem to have taken a significant step backwards when it comes to Britain. It's all a bit triangular. Next up we have Marinus of Tyre, born around 60 AD, credited with the equirectangular projection of the world, longitude and latitude, much underrated and much undermentioned when it comes to world mapping history. Marinus put the westernmost known part of the world as the Canary Islands. Everything to the east was given a degree for the direction and a stadia for the distance. Despite Eratosthenes calculating 300 years or so prior, Marinus measured the circumference of the world as 33,000 kilometres using this mathematics. So we have moved on little with some techniques here, but we still have nothing that resembles the coastline better than 270 BC with Eratosthenes. Next up we have Ptolemy, 100 to 170 AD, and much of his work was based around the foundations of Marinus's work. In fact, it might be suggested that this was an issue in itself. Ptolemy's work stuck around for centuries, and he, like many at the time, was a mathematician, a geographer, an astronomer and a poet, and much of his work has been copied countless times from the medieval to the more modern antiquarians. What of maps, what of coastlines? Is 150 AD too much to ask for a decent map? And the answer is yes and no. You see, Ptolemy did write everything down, but none of his maps survive. But if you write stuff down, well, that's great, because he wrote down the longitude and the latitude, and if you have the longitude and latitude, you can broadly draw maps from his writings, even if those transcripts do get a little bit mistranslated on occasion. Okay, next up, let me show you the single most extraordinary map I've seen. This is a copy of the Putinga table. Now, if you know our channel well, you've seen we've done a video specifically on this. Now, this is a copy of a Roman map. So it's a copy done in 1250, I think, by some monks or thereabouts, 2 foot wide. So you kind of get the idea of the scale. The entire Roman Empire mapped on it. And you can also tell a few things about this, like you can tell that it wasn't meant as a map because it's got towns on it which didn't exist at the same time. So we've got Pompeii and we've got Constantinople. So perhaps this tells us that this map was more of a show of strength of the Roman Empire rather than a map for map's sake, maybe at worst a transit map. And you can imagine this adorned on a great hall in a Roman basilica or something similar. So if we keep going, we're going to ask the question, will this help us map the coastline of Britain at the time this was produced, probably late 300s or thereafter? So we're nearly at Britain, we're getting excited. What is the coastline going to look like? And 22 foot later, here we are, there's Britain, and we know it's been chopped off because this bit was lost, unfortunately. And we can also tell there's a couple of towns which are already mixed up there the wrong way around, and it doesn't really give us an idea of the coastline because it's just jaggedy. It was never there to map anything in particular, least of all the Roman Empire, least of all Britain. On to the next map. Okay, so that's the 22 foot map rolled up. It would take nearly another 1,000 years for us to get what we want, which is a decent coastline mapped of Great Britain. Not with this one, but instead with this. This is the Goth map, and it's much more sort of easy to handle. There are 2 really important dates with this in mind. 1347, Edward III captures Calais. 19 years later, in unrelated events, the Isle of Sheppey is named Queensborough. Now, with those in mind, whilst unrelated, it does help us give a date to this map. We have Calais on here as part of Britain, and we also have the Isle of Sheppey as the Isle of Sheppey. Therefore, between those 2 dates, we have a 19-year window when this could have been done. Some have said later, but that's a whole other story. So the original copy is kept somewhere in the, I think, the Bodleian Library in Oxford. There are some really important things here. Not only do we have a very recognisable coast of Britain, although east is at the top, who cares, but we also start to see what was important at the time. We have over 700 place names and over 200 rivers, and those rivers are really quite prominent. So the original is, as we said, over in the Bodleian Library, and now they did a 3D scan of that original, and they found that it wasn't an original. That in itself was actually a copy, so it meant that there were more of these. it had over 2,000 pin marks in it. Now you won't see the pin marks in this one, my copy, and you won't see the pin marks in the one in the Bodleian Library, because that was done by a very high detailed 3D scan, real small resolution, or high resolution close up. You get the idea. So what else could we tell from this which is going to help us in our little quest today? So what we can tell from this map is that the area of Scotland was done at a very early date. They think this was changed over time, or certainly the south of Britain was, because this up here doesn't have a great deal of detail. The coastline of Scotland is just a straight line. It's got towns, got rivers, got all the inlets and the estuaries, but that's about it. If you were just looking at Scotland, well, you wouldn't necessarily tell that it was Scotland. But if we head down south to warmer climes, you would see that we have a lot more detail. So maybe the map makers lived in this area, because this concentration here is very detailed. And we also get an idea of what this may have been for, because we start to see some of these routes and they've got mileage between them. And a lot of them sort of give us an indication that they may have been on pilgrimage routes, which is quite interesting. Now, we're not quite sure if that is the case, but it's certainly one guess. Now, that may remain a mystery for some time, but at least now in the 1300s we have a good idea of what the coast looks like, the shape of Britain, at least the southern part, and the importance of the routes and the rivers. It's all coming together. Is this a sign of things moving forward from the Goth map? After the Goth map, we do seem to take a step backwards. We saw this back in the Iron Age, and once again after the Goth map we seem to stop. We go through maybe another 200 or 300 years of maps which are seemingly no better than the Goth map. In fact, probably a lot worse. Notably, we have the Waldseemuller map, dating to around 1507, forgive the pronunciation, a German cartographer, and he was reputed for his excellent maps of the globe, and possibly the first to include the Americas on it with that name. So well over 100 years after the Goth map, and we still have a problem for Britain. We seem to have gone back over 1500 years, and we're back to Scotland being mapped perpendicular to the rest of Britain. That was, of course, until a man named Robert Morden. Now, I'd love to know more about this guy. There's not a lot out there. He was a bookseller, a map maker, a globe maker, and he was renowned for making really detailed maps of Wales and some other counties. But how does this help us map the coastline of Great Britain? In essence, yes, he made maps of counties of England. We don't have a great deal of detail on the towns and the hills and the shapes and the routes between them, but the knowledge of each county is there to tell us he understood the geography well enough to map. In fact, his works were published and used by many antiquarians, William Camden and John Ogilby to name a few, but... So despite the really good maps of Morden, the really detailed county maps, we do have a problem with the coastline. You see, down there, as far as you can see on that little pinnacle, a little bit that sticks out to see is Leap Country Park. Now that direction is sort of southwest, and that works for Morden's maps, but when we go past Leap, the direction goes almost west, but on Morden's maps it doesn't, it carries on going south. It's almost like he's drawn just a wiggly line. Now that's highlighted by Chisel Beach, which is this huge, long, straight northwest, southeast alignment. However, Morden, he's just drawn a squiggly line for the entire stretch. Okay, I don't want to take things away from Robert Morden. I think he moved things forward hugely with mapping and cartography. In 1700 he wrote this book where it had over 80 maps in it, 80 sort of plates of European countries. Absolutely fascinating. I think though if we do want to map the coast properly, well, we're going to have to wait to the late 1700s with William Roy and the Ordnance Survey, but that is for another video. Before this video ends, I've just got an email which is vibrated in my pocket. It's from the team at Himaway. Paul, excellent video so far, thank you very much. You are probably the best creator we've ever worked with. Okay, they didn't say that, but nevertheless, can you remind the viewers of the couple of the things about the bike? The amazing big fat tyres which give a smooth ride, guaranteed. Impressive battery range of up to 80 miles, we've already mentioned that. It's joy. And of course, please include a mention in the video about the ongoing Black Friday promotion in our official website, links below, worth checking out. For instance, we have a US site offer of $999 promotion for the D3 fat tyre model on first come first served basis. Go check it out, and do go check out their website if you've ever considered an e-bike. This is the brand, and click on our links in the description below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you this time next week.